I think that particularly within me comes in my point of view with being a provider and a man within people around my life. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think Marco said considers me a yes man, and I consider him a yes man as well. We're there for the people around us.
Welcome back to the Masking Tapes. I'm your host, Carolina Hidalgo-McCabe. You're listening to part 2 of this episode with Fran and Marcos. In part 1, we talked about their lives, the concept of bromance and male friendship, emotional gold digging, therapy, and a night with the rugby team, and that's where we pick up now. In this part of the episode, we'll talk about feeling blame for the harm of other men, the debate online between whether we'd like to encounter a man or a bear in the woods, and the role models that we have in our lives. We'll end with the discussion of machismo and, of course, what they love about being men. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Marcos, back to the question that prompted this of how do you feel between these two narratives of how to be the Ultraman, how men are the worst thing ever?
I think the toughest thing that I think sometimes men have to balance is the idea that most killers, rapists, and abusers, and most of the people committing crimes are men, right? And so most of the people abusing their power because men have power are men, right? And so I think many times what's tough is trying to talk with society and be like, I know it's men that are doing this most of the time, but it doesn't have to be me, right? Like if a guy just abuses, or if a guy hits my daughter in school when I'm a grown up and I have a family, right? I'm abused in a certain way too, and not to take away from the fact that the main victim would be my daughter. But the thing is, that's bad for everyone. It's not that men are enjoying it or letting it pass. In fact, many times it's men that put themselves on the line to the defense of victims. And I think that because men have this inherent, on a demographic scale, right? They have an inherent biological, physical advantage, strength, speed, and these things. I think that when you have a specific power, that comes with more responsibility, and when some people are not able to handle that responsibility, that leads to the abuse of that power. It's not just the victim that is against that abuse of power. It's also all of the men that have the power and still don't abuse it. Those men are also against that. And those men will fight for you, the same as the women that will fight for you, right? Everybody's fighting because, let's say, 10% of men are evil, which is a lot, but let's say 10% of men are evil and only 2% of women are evil. I don't think that that's how things work, right? It doesn't mean that the other 90% should be judged for the horrors of that 10%. I think that to a certain extent, there is a responsibility within men to try and like with that power comes the responsibility of not just not abusing your power, but also keeping the people that are abusing that power in check, right? I think if I'm in a room with one strong person and two weak people, and the strong person is abusing those two weak people, let's say physically, right? I think I have a responsibility to stand in the way. Right. And I think that's part of that power. I don't think that this is just men versus women. And I think that's many times how it's portrayed to be in social media. And a lot of women end up thinking that they're alone in this fight. And I know that some men will abuse their power, but you're not alone. Like, we're here. We also hate that abuse. So yeah.
I think you're bringing up a point that a lot of men feel, and brought me back to a conversation that we had, I think this was 2 years ago, which was, there was the thing that was trending on the internet of, would you rather encounter a man in the woods or a bear in the woods? And a lot of women on the internet were saying that they would rather encounter a bear. And we were all together on a group trip of guys and ladies. And the women in the group were all like, yeah, I'd rather encounter a bear. And Marcos, you particularly were not happy with that answer. And I think this comes back to this, what you're saying right now is like, you don't want to feel blamed for what other men are doing to cause harm. And at the same time, women know that they are more, that despite the strength of a bear versus a man, what they have encountered in their day-to-day life is more fear or pain brought about by men in their lives than the bears in their lives. And I think that's a big component here. And one of the things too there is you're saying that men are there's a lot of good guys out there who are willing and excited and you want to use their privilege for good to protect women, to protect victims, to protect children. And I think a lot of women are like, okay, where, how? Like, where, not just when it's showy and you're the knight in shining armor protecting me at a club where all of a sudden a guy is going too far, but also how in your own spaces of the locker room or in the private sphere in the frat house are you using your privilege? Not specifically you, Marcos, but in general to men of like, how are you using that privilege in spaces that I'm not even in to protect me by like conversations with your male friends when women are not around to protect me. And I think that that's the difference. But the other piece that I thought was really interesting that you're right, men are the biggest perpetrators of homicide in the US, but they're also the biggest victims of homicide because men are killing men at alarmingly high rates. And I think too there is like, okay, what is happening and where are men leading community intervention programs to stop gun violence, gang violence, etc. And that's those to me are the men of courage, the ones who are seeing the issues and responding to those issues, and especially thinking of like the suicide rates are affecting me, the homelessness rates are, the opioid crisis, homicide, like are all disproportionately impacting men. And a lot of times that community work is actually mostly led by women who do the community work, and men are doing the more like hard skills of engineering, and which you're an engineer, or also in the policy space in politics, but not in the community care level of that. So I think that's another shift that will need to happen as men realize what is going on with other men, to be like, oh, I want to protect you too. Like, I don't just need to protect women. I actually need to protect my brother, or I need to protect my best friend or my nephew, etc. I don't know if you agree or disagree.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing is, at the end of the day, I think that since men have the privilege and the power in society, I think that men are not gonna like come out and be like, we need to defend men, right? Like that would just not only does it not occur to many people, I just think it would sound very controversial, right? Like, why are you defending the perpetrator when in reality you're saying, no, I'm defending against the perpetrator. Yes, the perpetrator is man, but the victim is many times man as well.
And sometimes the victim and the perpetrator are also the same person in different ways, not just of like, oh, a man, but a lot of hurt people. And so a lot of people who are victims of child abuse or neglect are also the ones who are perpetrating such things. And so
Absolutely.
It's also about how you interrupt those cycles.
Yeah. I think one thing that I wanted to mention, I was reading this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, amazing book. And one of the things that I remember is that somewhere in early 2000s, there was this terrorist attack in Jerusalem in a bus, right? A bus exploded and the people freaked out. And a few weeks later, another bus exploded. And bus travelers dropped precipitously. People stopped going on buses. They started taking taxis. They started driving their cars, even though it would take them more time. And the thing is, some people did the math, and you had a higher chance of dying from taking your own car than to just ride the bus like always. Because two exploding buses in a massive city are such a small chance. And so it's kind of like not saying that the train of thought of women thinking that they're safer around a bear than a man is ridiculous or just outright nonsensical, but there is a statistic, there is an availability heuristic that is in play there, where if in your memory the availability of times where men have hurt you is much higher than the times that bears have hurt you, you're going to think that men are more lethal and more dangerous than bears. And at the end of the day, I think the vast majority of the times, if you encountered a man in the woods, they'd just be like, oh, hey, and then that would be all.
No, I understand that there's a logical fallacy at play there, but I do think that the fact that so many women on the internet were saying they would rather see a bear says a lot about the safety that women feel.
Yeah.
And I heard this phrase recently that men are afraid that women will laugh at them and women are afraid that men will kill them. Like that is the dichotomy at play in heads.
That
and
is
I think
so
that
good.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible, but it's also like, okay, in these things, we don't need to think, you can think about it the logical way, but we also need to think about it like, where are we now and what are we going to do about it? Because the three of us are in our mid-20s and there's a lot of clusterfucks happening in this world. And so it's like, where do we go from here? So I think to make this a little bit less of a depressing conversation, I want to know who your role models for masculinity are.
I think Marcos is one of those few peoples where he is who he is everywhere. And his standards do not change from one person to another or in one context to another. Or if there's a woman or there's not a woman. We have a safe space between him and I where we can talk about anything in any way. So I think we are very honest and we understand each other very well. But I think his standard that he sets for men is top of the line. I could see him physically putting himself in the way of a car and anybody out there. So I really appreciate him for that.
That's very, very sweet and emblematic of the bromance right there.
Yeah, I'm touched. This is going to sound so horrible.
His role model is not you, Fran.
That's okay. That's okay.
No, because it's actually like...
He doesn't like the way I make my eggs.
It's funny, but it's that my role model is my future me, which is so funny because Fran just said me. And then I'm like, yeah, myself. I project myself as like who I want to be as a father, as a husband, and the kind of care I want to have for the people around me. And I sometimes get really emotional about like, just, I don't know, the idea that someday I'm going to have kids and watch them grow and have conversations with them and help them figure out the mysteries of life and interactions with humans. And I find that so beautiful that I try to think myself as the best dad and husband and friend ever. And my ideal dad, which is like someone that is there all the time and is willing to share his own failures and his own emotions and is able to be vulnerable and share vulnerability and break the stereotypes and the molds with which a lot of men are raised in.
Where have you gotten examples of, like, how have you picked up those ideas of that's what your ideal dad would be?
I think one figure there is Messi. I think...
That's so Argentinian of you.
I know. But it's because Messi is someone that is just so himself most of the time. And you can see like just videos of him with his kids and his family and the fact that he has like all his kids tattooed around his body and he has the names of his kids around the rim of his mate. And the fact that he like, I don't know, it's just like you can see in interviews people talk to him about football and he's kind of like uncomfortable because everybody like just enshrines him, right? And he just feels uncomfortable because he's not that kind of guy. He's not a showboat. And the interviews, like, he's so timid and so chill and so thankful for, like, the opportunity to be in an interview and things like these. But then they ask him about his kids and he just lights up.
I like that it's more about Messi as a dad than a football player right there.
Yeah.
And I also, just thinking back to your emotional... the only time I've seen Marcos cry is the day that Argentina won the World Cup. And I remember being like, oh, wow, that's some raw emotion right there that I was not expecting. So
I was shaking.
Thank you, Messi. But I do think that that's really interesting, going back to the way Fran started this podcast of where does provider status come from? And it's not that Messi necessarily is providing millions and millions of dollars for his kids and et cetera, is what you see as valuable as a father, as a provider. It's that he's showing pride, emotional, like openness and empathy, beaming with fatherhood and being like, okay, in what way can we reframe provider status instead of how can you make money quick and make the most money possible and whatever. But how do you actually find joy in your family and the relationships in your life and the friendships of your life and what really matters there?
I think you once asked me or us, what is one of the best things about being a man? And I think my answer at that moment, I don't know how I framed it, but it was something along the lines of, and anybody can do this. I don't mean to say, hey, this in one particular way or the other, but I want people to be able to count on me. I want people to see themselves in a struggle, a moment of loneliness, in a moment of need, in a moment of need someone, and I want to be that kind of person. I want to be there for the man and the woman and anybody that needs somebody. It could be something very important in their lives. It could be something very unmeaningful. It could mean that somebody needs somebody that can help them move 17 boxes up, a flight of stairs. And I want to be counted on in that things. I think that particularly within me comes in my point of view with being a provider and a man within people around my life. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think Marco said considers me a yes man, and I consider him a yes man as well. We're there for the people around us. And I don't see I think Marcus and I don't try to take secondary approaches and hidden meanings to things and actions, but I think if I can count on people, they can count on me. Absolutely. I think that is how I would like to see myself, as the role of provider and member within my society. And I think that's one of the reasons why I studied what we studied international relations, and the focus that one I take with it. Focusing on peace and justice studies. And that's sort of what I want to see within myself, for myself, because of the standards that I set up for myself, but also within my immediate community, as we had previously mentioned. But also I hope to take him throughout Latin America or worldwide.
You skipped ahead on my last question, which I was just about to
My
get
bad.
to, which was, what do you love about being a man? But
Yes.
I want to harp on one last point that you made there before I asked Marcos that same question. But in the context of Latin America too, the models of masculinity that you both show up as, with compassion, with close friendship, where do you see that coming from your Latino backgrounds? And oftentimes I once heard the phrase machismo doesn't mean that Latin America has more machismo or not than any other region in the world. It's not our fault that we have a good name for it. We have a good name for describing misogyny. And so then people are like, oh, it's machismo. It's like, okay, sorry, we have a catchy term.
So true.
But at the same time,
never
I'm
thought
curious
about
how
that,
that shows up with your identities as Colombian and Argentinian.
I think in Argentina, there is definitely a degree of sexism. I think I was shielded from it a little bit because of my upbringing. I think I grew up going to a school with both men and women. I think that created an environment where I really just saw everyone like the same. It's just like men and women, and obviously I'm heterosexual, so it's not the same.
Obviously.
No, it's
Put that in the
obvious
record.
because
Make
you
sure that's
guys
in the
know me.
transcript. Make sure that
Title,
goes in there.
obviously I'm heterosexual.
That's
No,
the
but
clip
you guys
need
know
right
me.
there.
But I'm heterosexual, so growing up.
I like woman.
No, I guess actually that doesn't even play into it. But what I wanted to say is that growing
I'm
up
heterosexual.
with both men and women.
Sorry.
But
Last time. Start from the top, so that Caro can clip it nicely.
that's a very interesting
No,
question,
that's
Cara.
going in. That's going in. That whole interaction was priceless.
I think growing up with both men and women in such equal terms meant that everybody played sports. We played different sports, but everybody played sports. Everybody went to the same classes. We studied together. I think it was different. I do think there's a degree of sexism in Argentina that is much more than I would like it to be. But at the same time, I think Argentinians sometimes take pride in the kind of scale of social development, because we look at countries like Brazil or Peru where we hear a lot more stories that are much worse than what we're seeing in Argentina. But at the same time, there's a lot of fucked up things going on in Argentina that involve that power struggle or that power privilege. So I'm definitely not going to say that Argentina is in a good spot.
But it is much more advanced than many other countries, and
Yes.
surveys and statistics
Yeah.
show that Argentina is progressing a lot faster around gender equality.
Totally.
And has baked
It
it
is.
in more into policy than many other countries too. Fran, how has machismo shown up in your life?
I like the way you coined it, where you said we have a better term for it. I think it's seen throughout the world indeed. But I want to push back a little bit on that, in which I have seen within my experience in Colombia and Latin America. I lived 5 years in Mexico, where I definitely have seen that play a big aspect and a big role. And I think, it's a big case in being aware, being conscious of that. I grew up in a very privileged background within Colombia and within Mexico, kind of schools that I went to, the communities that I moved myself throughout, where I know my sister is not always safe, but she's safer, I do remember a particular case where I think I was 12 at the time. We were in Mexico City at the time, and in the parking lot, a man was physically beating up I don't know, his partner or somebody within a car, and security guards were around and nobody was doing anything about it. And I do remember being shocked at that moment of one, seeing it, and two, nobody was doing anything about it. A security guard, by all means. And she drove off, left him there in the car, and nothing was spoken. I was there with my dad, and nothing was spoken of. We didn't touch the topic. It was just left to that. And I know because within Mexico, particularly, there's a big case of femicides. I hope I'm not butchering it. But also impunidad, of impunity, where these cases are not they call that persecuted. No, that's not the
Yeah,
word. Prosecuted. And so no, I do believe that is a issue. It's a systemic issue, and it's to be addressed, particularly within the Latin American region within it. But going back to your question within the machismo, I think apart from the privilege financially and economically and societally, I think I was particularly privileged because I grew up within a family, both sides of my family, where there's a matriarchal aspect to it, where the leading figure within my life growing up was, my great-grandmother. She passed away when I was 18. So my great-grandmother was a leading figure within my family. And my grandmother from that same side is an absolute figure within our family that leads, sets the example, sets the standards. And I've learned so much from my great-grandmother. I learned so much from my grandmother, and my mother really emphasized these sorts of ideas and values. And yes, she might have put some things on me that I would have pushed back on, but also the women within my world have really showed up and been there for me. My aunt has been so particularly special to me within my college years, living far away from any relative that I had, but my aunt was really there for me, showing up, being there for me, keeping up with me. And so I really appreciate not only the lessons that they gave me, but they also shaped they played a big role in who and how they shaped me as a man. And I just absolutely admire them for that. And I'm very appreciative of that. And I'm conscious of it. So I know that that's not the case for everybody out there. My friends also shaped me and helped me grow, where it's not as much of a up-down relationship, but also I think we speak eye to eye when we talked on these topics, and you really ask questions and you push and you ask follow-up questions, which doesn't usually happen within many male relationships, I would say, which is particularly admirable of you.
Thank you, Fran. And I feel the same about you. I do think that that's beautiful of looking at the role models that don't just have to ascribe to your gender in your family. Men don't only have to look to other men as their role models, but also to the women in their lives, also of how to be how do you want to act now such that your great grandchildren will be on some podcast about masculinity and will be referencing you as someone who they look to for a model of showing up in a family. And I think the same way that you do, but about my grandfather, of the role he played in my life too. Marcos, we are out of time, and I want to ask you the final question. What do you love about being a man?
I think we previously touched on the idea that men having the privilege and the power in society means it comes with more responsibility. I think I enjoy that responsibility. Sometimes, it can be tough, obviously, but at the same time, having the power and having the ability and desire to use it for good, I think can be so beautiful, to the point where it's a strange dynamic where sometimes you might help someone out using that privilege. And if they thank you, they're not really thanking the privilege that you have. They're thanking the fact that you decided to use it for good. And I think that's pretty beautiful. At the same time, I also think that doing good with a big privilege that someone is given should be the underlying assumption. You're born with a privilege, do something with it, share it. At the same time, it's not that black and white, right? Just because you're a man doesn't mean you were privileged in a general sense growing up. I know a lot of people that were not. You might have one type of privilege and lack 7 others, right? Or you might be a woman and have been born with a lot of other privileges. I think the general privilege is there, but I think it's also good for people to understand, hey, you are you, you're an individual, you're a person. Do the best you can with what you have.
Wow. And it kind of goes with the phrase, to whom much is given, much is expected. And it's also
Right.
okay, how do you use what you have to do good in this world and show up as best you can every day and help bring people along with you. And I think that's kind of our mandate on this earth. This has been phenomenal.
Apart from saying thank you for being the person you are and providing the space, also for your daily questions and new insights, and really pushing up with the follow-up questions. What I wish for everybody is show up for others, show up for yourself, love others, and love yourself.
That's beautiful. I think
I
that's
can't
great.
top that. So
Yeah, you can't top that. Fran got
Well,
it.
this
Fran
should-
got the last word right there. And I'm just so grateful for both of you for saying yes. You guys are my yes men. I need to incorporate that somehow in the podcast title.
This was
because
scary.
You two are the yes men. And I am just so grateful for the friendship of both of you and the example of friendship that you two have shown me and how to show up in this world too. And you both are role models to me in many different ways. And so I'm so grateful you decided to come on and share parts of yourself that are not the easiest to share. But I think by walking through this world with the example that you two set, you are impacting so many people and bringing them along with you. So I'm so grateful, and thank you both.
thank you, Caro.
Thank you. Thank you, Cara.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to both parts of the podcast episodes with Marcos and Fran. It was such a joy to record with these two. They're hilarious, they're amazing men, and I'm just so grateful for their friendship and their vulnerability and the lessons that we can all learn from them. So make sure to stay tuned for future episodes. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and make sure to follow us on @maskingtapes.pod on Instagram. Have a great one.